So welcome to Prepping for Passover. Everything you need to know to master the Seder. We are going to be doing a little bit of a crash course today. Welcome, Zach. Good to see you.
Hi, Rabbi. Thanks for having us.
Of course. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a crash course for the Seder. And here are my goals for tonight. Okay, we tried to advertise exactly what we plan to do. The Seder is often, depending which Seder you're at, some Seders can go for 5-6 hours. That's not our plan tonight. We don't plan to go for 5-6 hours. What we do plan to do tonight is as follows. Number one, I hope that we will get you mentally and emotionally in the right frame of mind in order to be ready to do a Seder, which means understanding the significance of the Seder, what we're here to accomplish tonight. By tonight, I mean the night of the Seder. And in addition to preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally, hopefully making ourselves a little bit more of a to-do list or a checklist physically. So that means hopefully some of you are still doing some shopping. There might be certain things you're forgetting about in terms of the Seder, so you'll end up with a shopping list by the time tonight is over. I'm not going to give you a shopping list, but I'm saying if you take notes throughout, so then you'll hopefully it'll jog your memory with lots of things that we need. It will also give you a checklist in terms of what's important to be done at the Seder. You know, some of us don't have the patience to sit as our parents or our grandparents did for 5-6 hours. So what are the important key, not to miss, elements of the Seder that we should do? Now, in addition to that, I am aware that here we have some Seder pros. And for the Seder pros, by that I mean, people who have done a Seder, attended a Seder many times. And for you, I would like to at least, so in addition to the serving as a refresher course, I'd like to try to share a couple of insights throughout as we go through this as to what the Seder is all about, things that you can share during your Seder that might not be the same thing that you shared last year and the year before, etc. Okay. So that being said, a couple of introductory remarks. Number one, tonight's class is sponsored by Mrs. Laura Reitman. Thank you, Laura, in honor of her dear cousin, or it's your mom's cousin. Who is it, Laura?
It's actually my father's cousin.
Your father's cousin, sorry.
And she's 96 years old.
I was just going to say, who's 96 years old. This is Bela Weiss. May she live and be well and continue to be able to celebrate many, many Passovers for many years to come. I hope she's vaccinated already. I don't know. In any event, so prepping for Passover. Hold on. So 2 more introductory remarks. I mentioned this earlier, but for those that just joined us, if you'd like to go get a pen and paper, now is a great time to do so because we're definitely going to be mentioning a lot of information here. And while I'm happy to send the slides from tonight's class over to you as a PDF, like that you can print it out if you feel that will be useful for you. If there's anything here that you feel that you want that you might want to have on hand during the Seder to share. If there's anything you like here in the slides, let me know. I will send those slides over to you. Another option is so with the pen and paper, 2 ideas to do. Obviously take notes in general, but 2 specific types of notes you might want to do is if you have a shopping list of some sort, maybe you have one already that you've been working on, you can kind of add things to the air as we go through and you're like, oh, I didn't realize you need lettuce for tomorrow or something like that, so you can add it to the list. And then another paper on the other side where as we go through the Seder and we'll go through all 15 steps, we're going to be doing it quickly and we'll try to explain each one and some significance, etc. You might want to take notes on each one of those as we go through. Another option is if you'd like to have a Haggadah with you, if you have like one that you care a little less about, please don't make notes in the margins of your grandmother's Haggadah. You know what I mean? But if you have like an extra Maxwell House one lying around or something like that, or one of these more pamphlet-y ones, and you'd like to make notes in the margins, I think that would be great, and I think you will find them to be very useful during your Seder. Okay, so tonight's class is going to be divided in half. What was that? Oh, sorry. Tonight's class is going to be divided in half. The first half, we are going to be focusing on our frame of mind, getting ready spiritually. The second half is when we'll do a lot more of those checklist items, physical things, etc. But we will open up with an exercise. As many of you know, Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, is not just something that occurred many, many years ago. The Talmud tells us, B'chol dor vador, the Talmud enjoins us. B'chol dor vador, in every single generation, a person should view himself as if today he is leaving Egypt. Our sages explain the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which is not synonymous, but etymologically related with the word for constriction or limitations or boundaries in Hebrew, which is the word Meitzarim. What is the significance here? On the night of the Seder, it's not just supposed to be something that we commemorate from many years ago. You know, I once heard somebody compare the Seder to Lahavdil President's Day. President's Day is one of the, or President's Day weekend, etc., is one of the more interesting American holidays. Why? Because it doesn't really celebrate anything. Nothing happened on President's Day. One president's birthday, I think Washington's birthday, is a couple days before. Another president's birthday is a couple days afterwards. I don't remember who. Is it Lincoln? I don't remember. In any event, yeah, you think so? Okay.
I think so.
And so they chose, and we can't take a week off of work, and we also can't do one day smack in the middle of the week, 1 week, and another day smack in the middle of the week the next week. So instead, they chose the Monday in between. It's a convenient day. You take off, you have the rest of the weekend. And it's a day to celebrate both people. Now, this is beautiful if all you're doing is commemorating something that happened many years ago, because you need to remember it at some point. You can't remember, you can't spend every single day doing these things. So you designate one day on the calendar, that's the day that you remember them, and that's beautiful. The Seder is not such an experience. The Seder is supposed to be an experience where we actually go through what happened when they went through it. And we'll soon go through certain elements during the Seder that are specifically designed that way in order to try to get us through that. In order to try to get it, like to trigger us. That's a good 21st century speak. To trigger us to try to go through that process. So a good question to ask yourself right now, because many people wait till the Seder to ask themselves this question. A good question to ask yourself right now, and that this should be the focus over the next couple of days as you're getting ready for the Seder, as you're going to actually do the Seder, the first Seder, the second Seder, is what are the stifling elements in your life to hold you, that seem to hold you hostage? Perhaps it is a certain person, a traumatic experience, a toxic relationship, or crushing financial hardships. Try to identify 3 major antagonists. I don't know about you guys. For me, the struggle is not to identify 3 of them. For me, the struggle is to identify only 3 of them. I got to choose which 3 I'm focusing on. But we all have things that hold us back in life. For me specifically, it's people, relationships. Maybe those are a little less relatable for me. For someone here that might be the one. But definitely, experiences are something that are very, very meitzarim. They're very constrictive. Whether it's something that happened in our youth, it's a certain part of our personality that we struggle with, anything like that. Try to identify 3 of them, write them now down on a piece of paper. And this is what we're going to call your personal Mitzrayim, your personal exile. And the goal, of course, is we have to think back to the redemption from Egypt. Who redeemed the Jewish people from Egypt? God, of course, right? And Hashem is here, and He's ready, and He's willing and able to take us out of Mitzrayim as well. However, we have to do the very minimum to actually take the steps to actually leave that Egypt. So before we do that, let's try to set ourselves a goal. What would a redemption from those 3 constrictions, from those 3 boundaries that you're suffering from in your life, what would that look like? Because this is a very good exercise to do. I'll give it another minute. As we talk about that, what are 3 things that are holding you back in life? Close your eyes if you'd like to. This is a great meditation to do, even though I don't have the beautiful music behind me. 3 things that you're trying to be redeemed from. 3 things that you feel like in your life hold you back. What would redemption look like from those 3 things? Okay? So if they're financial hardships, right? A very, very simple and easily relatable one. What would redemption from those financial hardships be? For some people, it's getting the money. But if we think a little deeper, it's not just being able to make ends meet or whatever it is. It's also maybe being able to live with a little less stress, right? Being able to live with a little less anxiety about financial hardships, things like that. And now, as you're thinking about these things, imagine and feel and breathe that redemption, because Hashem is ready to give it to us on the night of the Seder, and all we have to do is tap into it. Okay? And that is, my friends, what the night of the Seder is all about. The goal is for us to learn to appreciate the redemption process that we're going through here. Okay, now the Seder, I hope everybody finished that exercise, because I'm going to try to also move along like that we don't spend too much time on anything. The Seder is also a very old tradition, as we know. It starts from the actual the actual exodus from Egypt, of course. In the Torah, we are told that God commanded the Jewish people that they should start making a Seder the next year. And as a result, we have a lot of beautiful stories of Seders throughout history. Ron, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Here we have a beautiful story of how even in the most difficult situations, our ancestors always found a way to mark the occasion. Go ahead.
The people in the camp are already
So 1
used.
second, right? So this is a direct the word is slipping my mind, but a retelling from Moshe Pearl, who was a camp resident in one of the concentration camps, and obviously this is Pesach 1943. Go ahead.
One camp resident, Moshe Pearl, related, the people in the camp are already used to their miserable situation. They saw death before their eyes, but they asked, where could we get flour? How could we bake matzah? Shortly before Passover, one of the SS men in the camp entered my workshop where I painted signs. He asked me to make dummy targets for target practice. Just then an idea flashed through my mind. I claimed that I would need flour, lots of flour, to paste the pictures of soldiers on the targets. He asked how much flour. I said that it would need 5 kilograms. He liked my suggestion and immediately gave me an appropriate referral. The Jews of Vaihingen concentration went to work baking the matzah in secret, even though they knew that they would die if they were caught. They baked the matzah in the oven in Pearl's workroom, keeping the door and windows sealed. When the night of the Seder came, 20 Jews managed to pull off a Seder where, aside from the matzah, they ate potatoes and drank homemade wine, which consisted of water and sugar. They even managed to read the Haggadah. While the Nazis succeeded in destroying so many Jewish lives, they failed to destroy the Jewish life from these Jews on that Passover.
Thank you, Ron. I think if they can make a Seder in the concentration camp, then we can definitely make a Seder. Even if we're going to be all alone at home, we can make it and make it meaningful. So we mentioned that on the night of the Seder, one of the things that we're very much focusing on is our personal redemption. And this is not just a beautiful thing, and it's not just that the Talmud enjoins us to do so, but it's also something that we can actually tap into. There's a very, very strong spiritual energy which radiates on the night of the Seder. Some of you might be familiar with the fact that many Jewish holidays are specifically on a specific day of the Jewish calendar because they're not only commemorating an event, but they're tapping into a certain spiritual energy. Many of them, of course, are also commemorating events. But I want to give the example of Yom Kippur. Of course, Yom Kippur is part of the high holidays. There's Rosh Hashanah, and the fact that it comes after the new year, and that's why we're asking for forgiveness, etc. But the reason why that day is chosen is because that's the day when Moses came down from Mount Sinai for the final time. Moses was on Mount Sinai in total for 3 sets of 40 days and 40 nights, and each one for a different purpose. One of them was to receive the first tablets. Those, of course, were broken. Then a second time, the second set was for the second set of tablets. And the third time was in order to secure forgiveness on behalf of the Jewish people. In other words, the Jewish people had sinned with the golden calf, and God was planning to destroy them and start again from Moses. And Moses said, no, thank you. And it took 40 days and 40 nights, the conclusion of these 120, until he came down from the mountain and gave over the word of Hashem to the Jewish people. What Hashem told him, Vayomer Hashem, God said, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven you as per my words. Okay? Now, in Jewish history, this event is regarded as extremely significant. Right? This is about 123 days, give or take, after a little more, after Mount Sinai, after Shavuot, in other words, the day when the Jewish people received the Torah. Why does that day go on to become Yom Kippur? Because this event, God telling the Jewish people, I know you have sinned. I know it's been such a terrible moment, but you've actually been redeemed and you've actually been forgiven for that action. was the first time, at least the most extreme time in history that ever happened. That God was literally going to destroy the entire Jewish people because of how terrible it was. And then on the flip side, that there was a complete and total forgiveness based on Moshe davening on behalf of the Jewish people. This was so significant that till today, every year when we're looking for a day that we want to tap into a spiritual energy of forgiveness and get ourselves forgiven, we choose the day of Yom Kippur. That's why Yom Kippur, we spend all that time in shul and davening, etc. This is because there's a spiritual energy that's radiating, whether we like it or not, and whether we're in tune with it or not. And we can choose to tap into that. Similarly, the reason why earlier we did a little meditation of what are some things that you'd like to be redeemed from, what is your personal exile, or what are you looking to be redeemed from, is not just because it's a nice thing to think about. It's not just because the Talmud tells us that we should try to leave our own exile. It's because God actually assists us with this particular thing, with this particular topic of leaving Egypt, of leaving our restraints. Now, this leads us to the beginning of the second section of our class. You see, as a result, because there's a very specific spiritual energy, and we're trying to tap into that, and we're trying to harness that energy in order to help us leave our own Egypt and leave our own boundaries and limitations. Therefore, there's a very specific way that this is done. And this is going to lead us to the mitzvahs and why it's so important to do these things so perfectly and to do the mitzvahs correctly, etc. There's a story they tell about a wealthy man who used to host at his table. He used to host, a wonderful crowd. Every single, I don't know if it was every night or every Shabbat, he would host guests. They would stay by him. They would eat by him, the whole thing. I guess it wasn't Shabbat because the story has a bell. In any event, so it's a Tuesday night, and there's a particular poor man who comes to town. He's told that this wealthy man has this beautiful meal that he puts out every single Tuesday night. Anybody can come and they can eat at his house. And the wealthy man has a little bell that sits right next to him. And as he's ready for each course, or each whatever, he's ready for the wait staff to come and clear the tables. He rings the bell, and the staff come in and they whisk everything away and they bring out the next course. And they do this and they do that. He needs more water. Da-ding, da-ding. More water comes. More wine. Da-ding, da-ding. More wine comes, etc. Now, this particular wealthy man had a custom, a beautiful custom, actually. He didn't want to just help these down on their luck individuals. They say the best form of tzedakah is to teach a man to fish, right? To try to give him something that he can take with him. So this wealthy man had a custom that at the end of the meal, he would put out all the fine silver and china and everything. He could afford it. And he would say, every guest can choose one item from the table and take it home with you. Interesting custom. So this Yankel, our poor man who's here for tonight, he thinks this is a great opportunity. So he's been watching the whole meal. He's been watching the bell. And he's been watching how the wealthy man has been ringing it the entire time. So he requests, he says, I want that bell. The wealthy man looks at him and he says, strange request, interesting, but you want it, it's yours, no problem. I can get another bell. You know what I mean? He had plenty to spare. So our Yankel gets the bell. He comes home and he starts inviting guests. Everybody's like, what happened? Yankel went out of town. He became a rich man. He's ready to host hundreds of people. He starts to host a big meal. And everybody comes and they're like, he doesn't look like a rich man. He looks like he's just same old, same old. So what happened? What changed? So he says, just you guys wait. I got something magical up my sleeve. Sure enough, the moment arrives, everybody comes, everybody's starving, everybody's sitting around. And he whips out of his pocket this little bell. He says, you see this bell? This bell is magic. Anytime I ring it, somebody comes and they'll obey my every wish and command. I want water, they'll bring me water. I want meat, they'll bring me meat. I want wine, they'll bring me wine. Starts to ring it. And as King Solomon says, there's no response. Nobody is responding. He's like, I don't understand what's going on. So the next day he comes back, storming into the wealthy man's house. You gave me a fraudulent one. This bell doesn't work. I rang it and nobody came. Similarly, very often we forget that, we come to the Seder. We want to be redeemed. We figured it out. What's our Mitzrayim? What are the restrictions that we're trying to leave? And then we want to know how come it's not working, and we're not doing the actual acts that are supposed to bring these things about. We don't have what to back it up with. So at the night of the Seder, there's a very specific recipe, a very specific procedure that we're supposed to be following in order to be bringing about this redemption. And so this brings us to the second half of our class. The Seder, we'll go through for now, we'll go through 8 points. We're not going through the Seder yet. We're doing some introductory points, which are very important to understand. The Seder primarily is a fulfillment of a mitzvah that each and every single one of us has, which is l'saper b'yetziat Mitzrayim, to tell over the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Wally, if you can read for us, please, this verse from Shemot. Wally, you there?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Can you read this for us?
Sure. And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this, God did this for me when I went out of Egypt.
The Torah tells us that on the night of Passover, we should sit down and we should hold a Seder, literally. We should sit down, gather the family around and tell them the story of how we left Egypt. Okay? So the entire night is built around this concept, telling over the story. Now there's discussion among the sages as to how often this needs to happen, whether it needs to happen once a month, whether it needs to happen every single day. But at the very least, it needs to happen once a year at Passover time. We have to sit down and have a Seder. Okay? Now this is done in a very interesting way. Stephanie, if I can ask you to read for us, please. The Talmud says that the entire Seder is built in. Sorry, I muted you. The entire Seder is built in such a way that we start on a low and end on a high. You know, you want to make it dramatic. Go ahead, Stephanie.
He begins answering the question with the account of Israel. Shame and concludes with Israel's glory and expounds, for my father was a wandering Armenian until he completed the whole passage.
Okay, if you look in the Haggadah, you will notice a very interesting thing. And throughout the Seder, you'll notice this. We're here to celebrate freedom, but for some reason, we spend a heck of a lot of time talking about slavery. Not only slavery, we talk about ancient troubles that our forefathers suffered. We start from Arami Obed Avi, which is when Jacob was swindled by Laban. This is, if you talk about a backstory, this is like the backstory to the backstory. You know, way before the slavery in Egypt. The idea is that we're trying to show the low, which brought to the high, which is, of course, the Exodus from Egypt. Okay. Number 3, and Larry, if we can ask you to read, please. This is another verse. The entire night of Passover is framed as an educational evening for children. Now, of course, this is not only for physical children. If you have them, of course, that is one of the primary goals. But if you don't have children that will be with you at the Seder, the idea is to tap into your inner child, to educate that inner child. And that's why the Seder is framed as a question and answer. Go ahead, Larry.
I would attempt it in Hebrew, but I'm a little...
That's okay. Just jump in.
And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, because of this, Hashem did this for me when I went out of Egypt.
So the entire Seder is framed as a father talking to his son. In fact, when we get to the retelling of the story, how do we start off? With the famous 4 questions, right? And I get this question every year. Even if there's no one else at your Seder, and even if there's no children at your Seder, you are still supposed to ask those 4 questions. We ask them of our Father in heaven, right? Why is this night different than all other nights? And the rest of the Haggadah, when we start to tell the story how we were slaves in Egypt and we were taken out, etc., is supposed to be a response to that question. It's a typical Jewish response. It's a lengthy response. It's like a rabbinic response, you know. Starts with a story, but eventually we get to the idea that God took us out of Egypt, right? And so that is the third element. So these 3 elements together make up the first mitzvah of the evening. If you're creating for yourself a checklist, now's the time to put number 1. You want to make sure that before you go through the night of Passover, you have told over the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Even if you can't say the entire Haggadah, you should go through the story of the Exodus. Number 2, the second mitzvah, is the mitzvah of eating matzah. The Torah tells us, Barishon, Ba'arba'asa Yom L'chodesh Ba'erev, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month in the evening, you shall eat unleavened cakes until the 21st day of the month in the evening. This is not a rabbinic mitzvah. This is not a custom. Eating matzah is a biblical commandment. We are enjoined by the Torah to eat matzah. This is, of course, because we're so this is mitzvah number 2. You got to retell the story of Egypt, and you got to eat matzah. Now, eating matzah, of course, can be done with any matzah as long as it's made out of flour and water. It's kosher matzah. Machine-made matzah is also kosher for this, obviously, as long as it's kosher for Passover matzah, etc. However, I would strongly encourage you to get your hands. I know most of you have already received this either from me or from my brother Meir, for you, Wally, or from my brother-in-law Shalom, Larry, or Laura. I know you got from Label. And others you guys received. If you didn't receive from anyone yet, please reach out to me. We will make sure you have shmura matzah at your Seder. What is so special about shmura matzah? Matzah in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, is called 2 things, specifically the night of the Seder. We're not talking about the rest of the Passover, when you're going to eat matzah with cheese and matzah with chocolate, and all sorts of, somebody mentioned avocado, right? Smearing the avocado and the guacamole on the matzah. Specifically on the night of Passover, at the Seder, the idea of eating shmura matzah, that mitzvah that we're doing, is called by the Kabbalah 2 names. Number 1 is the bread of faith, and number 2 is the bread of healing. Now, throughout the year, all of us know we need more faith and more healing. Usually, and I'll tell you this as a rabbi in good stead, usually the solution is you got to roll up your sleeves and work. You need more faith, you got to study, you got to work on it, you got to meditate, you got to daven more. That's how we get more faith. You need more healing, again, daven to Hashem, do an extra mitzvah in honor of the fact that we should get more healing. And God knows this world can use more healing now. But we're not even talking just about physical healing, you know what I mean? Whether it's COVID or something else, right? We're talking also about mental healing, emotional healing, right? But on the night of Pesach, we have a simple fix. We are told that when we eat this matzah, and we're doing the mitzvah, particularly shmura matzah, gives us these things just by imbibing it. By physically eating the matzah, the shmura matzah, we are both taking into ourselves healing and taking into ourselves faith. Why is this? That's because that spiritual energy that there is in the matzah, while of course it's present in machine-made matzah too, assuming that it was done according to the laws, etc. And I don't know which companies yes, which companies not. But when you think about it, what is that matzah? Somebody pushed a button one day. For the next couple of weeks, millions and millions, billions and billions of matzahs were spat out of a machine. Compare that with the fact that you know that there was a Jew who actively was thinking. I've been in those matzah bakeries. When I was a kid, we used to go all the time. Every year we would go, my family would go. We would take part in our shift of the matzah baking, you know, like when the matzah that we would eat. And there's a Jew that stands there. There's many Jews that stand there together. And as they get ready to, each one makes a matzah, you know, because it's like they do them in shifts, 18-minute shifts, boom, boom, boom. And as they get ready to start literally making the matzah, everybody together says, L'shem matzahs mitzvah. In other words, we're doing this for the sake of a mitzvah, of a matzah that someone's going to do. Someone's going to eat this and actually bring down this powerful, powerful spiritual energy. You can't even compare it. Never mind the fact that it's shmura, that it's guarded so carefully, etc. So these are some of the benefits of shmura matzah. If you don't have any, please reach out to me and we'll make sure you get some. Okay, moving along. The next mitzvah. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is another verse which starts to talk about matzah, but then continues on by talking about maror. The Torah tells us that matzah, that the Paschal offering should be eaten, roasted, of course, and together, and on this night they shall eat the flesh roasted over the fire, and unleavened cakes, in other words, together with the matzah, with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So this brings us to the next mitzvah of the day. I don't remember which number we're holding, but if you're making your list, the mitzvah of eating maror. Now today it's rabbinic, according to most opinions, but certainly back in the day when they were eating the Paschal offering, it was biblical. The Torah tells us to eat bitter herbs to remember the slavery in Egypt. Okay. The next thing on our list is the Korban Pesach. We'll read in a moment the verses where the Torah tells us about taking the Paschal offering. But the reason why it's so important to remember this is because there's actually an opinion that if we don't remember these 3 things on the night of the Seder, by 3 things I mean Pesach, Matzah, Maror, the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice of the Paschal offering, the Matzah, and the bitter herbs, if we don't remember these 3 things on the night of Passover, according to many opinions, you haven't even, or at least according to one opinion, you haven't even fulfilled your Seder obligation. So it's very important. If you write it down again, it's very important that you mention the reasons for these 3 mitzvahs, right? The Paschal offering, the matzah, and the maror. Now, we of course today don't bring the Paschal offering, but we do commemorate it, and we'll talk about that soon as we get to the Seder plate with the zroa, the shenkbon that we put down on our Seder plate. Okay, Laura, if I can ask you please to read for us the verses where the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of slaughtering the Paschal offering.
Oh gosh, Rabbi, I'm so sorry. I'm on my phone and it's just too small. Oh, there we go. Thank
Is that a little
you.
better?
That's better.
Okay, go for
Okay.
it.
Speak to the entire community of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, let each one take a lamb for each parental home, a lamb for each household. And you shall keep it for inspection until the 14th day of this month, and the entire congregation of the community of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. And on this night they shall eat the flesh, roasted over the fire, and unleavened cakes. With bitter herbs they shall eat it.
Okay, thank you. So, welcome. Who just joined us? I don't know, whoever it is that just joined us. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So here we have the verses in the Torah where we have the mitzvah of the Pesach lamb, the Paschal offering that was brought back in those days. Welcome, welcome. In any event, moving along, the next mitzvah that we have, oh, whoops, there's no slide for it, is the 4 cups of wine. This is a rabbinic enactment. The idea is to evoke freedom. There are 2 opinions as to why we have 4 cups of wine. I know each one of them serves a certain purpose also. We're going to talk about that as we go through the Seder. Like one of them is for Kiddush, one of them is for benching, the grace after meals, etc. But in addition to that, the reason we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder is because there are 4 expressions that God uses with regards to redeeming the Jewish people, and that He promises the Jewish people that He's going to redeem them. And so these 4 cups of wine, and that's why we drink them leaning to the left, as we'll talk about it soon, because they're supposed to be a symbol of freedom. As we drink them, we're supposed to be tapping into the freedom. There are certain things we're supposed to do that tap into the slavery, tap into the slavery that we felt years ago and the slavery that we feel today. And then there are also certain things that we are reenacting that are supposed to help us tap into the freedom aspect. Okay. In addition, of course, to all of these things that we mentioned above, if you have your list, you can add a couple more things that are standard holiday things, not just Pesach things, not just Seder things, but there are Kiddush, just like every Friday night we make Kiddush at the Seder. We eat a meal, eating a festive meal. We light Shabbat candles. We're going to talk a lot about that because this year's a little bit different because we go from Shabbat directly into the holiday. So we're going to light candles after Shabbat as the holiday is beginning. All right. That being said, I think we are ready to dive into the Seder. The Seder plate. The Seder plate contains 6 items. You have a picture of it, of course, up here in front of you on the screen. Let me make it slightly larger, like that we can see it properly. There we go. 6 items on the Seder plate, and they are arranged as 3 kind of. When I was growing up, we used to call them 3 segals. You know that vowel with the 3 dots? It goes like that, right? 1, 2, 3. So you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's talk about the different elements of the Seder as we go through them, okay? So starting with the top right, okay? The top of the Seder plate, let's start on the top right. We have the Zeroah. The Zeroah is a shenkbon, and it's supposed to commemorate the fact that back in the day, in temple times, they would actually bring a korban Pesach. They would bring a sacrifice every single year. This was brought by every single Jew in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. They would bring the Paschal offering. Now, today we don't, and it's important to stress that. So while we're remembering the sacrifice, we're also recognizing that we don't actually bring the sacrifice, and that's why there's a custom, and you'll notice here in the picture, that the shenkbon should be scratched of any meat or flesh that there was on it in order to show we're not planning to eat this. This is just a commemorative, decorative item. If you cannot get a hold of a lamb's bone, like many people do, so you could use a chicken neck, a neck bone from a chicken, also works. Either way, it should be roasted. So roast it a little bit before Yom Tif, before the holiday. Make sure on Thursday, on Friday, roast it a little bit and take off as much of the meat as you can. The next item on the left, over here we have an egg. This was a brown egg, but it could really be any egg. But it should be a cooked egg. And we're going to eat this at one point during the Seder, as we'll talk about shortly. This is to remember the Korban Chagiga. Every single year, in addition to the special Pesach offering, there was also just an offering brought as part of the holiday. People were supposed to eat meat. So they would come and they would bring a sacrifice, and they would bring it in the Holy Temple, and then they would eat a large portion that would be slaughtered. Part of it would go for God, and part of it was so that they would enjoy meat. And so that's what this egg is for. The idea is to have a cooked item on the Seder plate, which we'll get to later when we actually get to eating it. In the center, I don't know if they have another. Sorry. So we already did the egg and the shenk plate. I didn't realize they have this. Okay. So in the center of the Seder plate, we have two items: the maror, the bitter herbs. Okay. The maror is there are 5 items actually that are listed in the Talmud as what's applicable to be used for maror. By maror we mean bitter herbs, to remember the bitter slavery, right? Which again we'll talk about as we go through the Seder. And while there's discussion about the different items, how to translate each item from there, which vegetable it is, etc., 2 items stick out as everybody knowing for sure these 2 work for maror, and they are horseradish and romaine lettuce. So that's what you want to have on your Seder plate: horseradish and romaine lettuce. Now, we make 2 sets of them, one in the center middle and one in the center bottom. Okay, the reason for that is because there are 2 times when we are going to eat maror, bitter herbs, throughout the Seder, as we will see later on. One time on its own and one time as part of the sandwich. Okay, moving along to the bottom right of the Seder plate, we have everybody's favorite, charoset. Right? Wally, how'd your charoset come out this morning?
Good.
Baruch Hashem, I saw you made. If you haven't made your charoset yet, don't worry, you have plenty of time. You can still make it. Wally's just ahead of his game.
my grandson.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you did it together with him. I saw. Awesome. So charoset is a concoction that we make in order to commemorate the mortar that the Jewish people were forced to make. There's a lot of discussion about the mortar in the Torah. It started off the Jewish people needing to make the mortar, but they were at least given the materials with which to make the mortar. And then eventually when Moshe came, right, they say before it got better, it got worse. So when Moshe came and told Paro that my people go, Paro's first reaction was, you guys have too much time on your hands. So he said, out of my palace. And he sent the slave drivers or the slave workers, whoever it was overseeing the slaves, to say from now on the quota will be the same, how many bricks they need to lay, etc. But there will be no more mortar provided. This was a big part of the pain that the Jewish people went through. In order to commemorate this, we put together a special mortar-like paste that we put down on our Seder plate called charoset. Charoset is made up of, and everybody does it differently, by the way. I mean, we're going to talk about the key ingredients, but everybody does it differently. Some people cook the ingredients before they do it. Some people don't. Some people chop it. Some people grate it. Some people grind them, etc. Whichever way you want to do it is fine. It should include, at the very least, apples and pears, walnuts, and then a little dash of wine. Okay. In addition to that, some people get a little more creative. They'll put in dates, pomegranates, walnuts, cinnamon, ginger. While are these some of the ingredients you were toying around with this morning?
Everything except the ginger.
Everything except the ginger. All right, there you go. Okay. The main purpose of it is that it should look like a mortar like paste, for lack of a better word. So it should have a brown tinge. We add the wine, a little bit of wine for the plague of blood. Remember the plague of blood. And of course, all the items in there, of course, should be kosher for Passover, as should everything at your Seder and throughout the 8 days of Passover. So that's part of the reason why some people might not put in, let's say, cinnamon or ginger, because if it's their custom not to eat it on Passover. Not that they're necessarily chametz, but certain people have customs not to eat certain things because they look like chametz or things like that. So then people might not include those things. Okay. Later on, we'll talk about this. The maror is dipped in the charoset. We'll note this as we're talking about the maror when we talk about it. Bottom left of the Seder plate, last item we have, a vegetable for karpas. Karpas, of course, is the vegetable that we're going to dip into the salt water. And some people use parsley, some people use a potato, some people use an onion. Either way is great. Some sort of vegetable that you can dip in, beautiful. Here they list a couple of other things. I've never seen people use these, but some people use celery, parsnip, radish, cabbage, and we mentioned raw onion or cooked potato. Okay. I think we are ready to jump into, sorry, one second. And then, of course, under the cover, separate from the rest of the Seder plate is on the top. And under that, if you have a fancy Seder plate or Seder, whatever, then great. If not, if you want to go buy one, that's also great. But even if you don't have, you could just do it with napkins. There should be 3 separate matzot, each one divided from the other one with something, with a little napkin or something. 3 separate matzot. Why 3 matzot? Okay, just a couple things to mention about matzah. We mentioned the shmura matzah, right? The fact that it was protected from when it was a grain and it was harvested until it actually became a matzah, until it actually went into the oven. That means through the grinding process and the separate and the weaving process and all the different things that not weaving. What's the word? Winnowing. The winnowing process. All the different processes that there are until it goes into the oven, or really until the water comes in contact with it. During the mixing into dough, it was made sure that this whatever it was at that point, the grain, the flour, whatever it was, doesn't come in contact with water. When it does come in contact with water, which at that point it has obviously the potential to become chametz, shmura means that it was guarded to make sure up until that point it doesn't get wet. And when it does become wet, it now goes into the oven within 18 minutes of the two coming in contact with each other, the flour and the water. So that's what shmura matzah means. Handmade, we spoke a lot about earlier. And circular. Okay, but now I want to talk about why 3 matzos. There are many reasons given. The most common one is that they refer to the 3 different types of Jews that there are: Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. The priest, the Levite, and the plain simple Jews, like I think most of us are, right? We got any Kohanim or Leviim here in the house? I don't think so. All right. Let's dive into the Seder, shall we? Now, the Seder is officially split up into 15 steps, okay? 15 kind of symbolisms. We're going to go through some of them together because if they're very short symbolisms, we'll go through them together. And we're going to split the steps up a little bit differently because we're going to add more steps of different things that need to be done, all right? Let's start with one that this year particularly is a little complicated, which is candle lighting, okay? As every holiday, we begin it with women lighting candles. Whatever your custom is for Shabbat, you should follow that same custom for the holiday. So if you're lighting 1 because you're single, 2 because you're married, 2 for the whole family, or 1 for every member of the family, like people have a custom, you should light those candles. If there's no woman in the house lighting the candles, whether because there's no Jewish woman in the house, or whether because you're single, then you should light candles. All right, now, of course, you're going to light candles on Friday night before Shabbat comes in, before the time that it says in the calendar for your local area. On a Saturday night, there's an interesting concept. You have to light candles after a certain time. Why? Because we're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, right? So we have to light candles after the time that Shabbat is already over. In addition to that, because it's the holiday, so we're not allowed to create a new fire on the holiday. So it has to be lit from a pre-existing flame. Now, just to clarify, because somebody once asked me, he said, Rabbi, I know it has to be a pre-existing flame, so I lit a flame and then I lit it from that flame. I'm like, no, you defeated the whole purpose. You lit a flame. We're not allowed to light fire on the holiday. We're only allowed to pull fire from an existing flame. The way to do this is to have one of those 48-hour candles, or even longer, that you can light before Shabbat, 72-hour candle. It'll last for the entire holiday. Anytime you need a fire, you take it from there to light your holiday candles. Okay? So that should be lit beforehand. A note of safety, a note of caution, put it in the sink. If there's a sink that you're not using, like that, just in case it should tip over or something, it'll be somewhere where there's water and it'll be wet, etc. Another option is to put it on, if you're not using your stovetop, so you can put it on the stovetop. In other words, between the burners, that's a space that's obviously meant to have a lot of heat. So nothing, people don't usually put things there that would catch fire, etc. Just a note of caution. Okay, once you have lit the candles.
Rabbi,
yes.
I have a question. So Motzei Shabbat, we light the holiday candle from the pre-existing. Do we use a long match to use?
You may use a match if you would like to. Just don't strike the match. You can use
No,
the match.
I use, yes,
One to the other. Yes.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
A long one is advisable. If you have a long one, then it won't.
I do.
It won't burn your fingers. You know, it won't burn your fingers as you're trying to.
No,
Yes,
no, I
Laura,
have a
go ahead.
long one. I have a long one.
Okay, perfect. Laura, go ahead.
Rabbi, did I hear you say that only one out of the 3 matzahs needs to be shmora matzah, not all 3?
No. All 3 should be shmura matzah.
Got it.
Ideally, all 3 should be shmura matzah. If you need more, please hit me up.
What do they represent again? The 3?
The matzahs, they symbolize the 3 types of Jews: Kohen, Levi, and Israel.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Cohen, Levi, and Israel.
All right. So the blessings that we make, okay, are different than usual. You're used to lahadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh, right? That's the end of the blessing, of course, with the traditional beginning, Baruch Atah Hashem, etc. But this time we said lahadlik ner shel Yom Tov, which is to light the candles of the holiday, and then of course She'achiyanu, which is the beginning of a brand new day. Okay, these are the blessings in English. Again, if you need these slides, it'll help you to have these, the blessings and everything prepared perfectly in order like this to have as an accompaniment to your Haggadah. That's great. I'm happy to send it over to you as a PDF. Just shoot me an email or send me a text message and I'll send it right over. Okay. Now that the women have lit candles, it's now time to make Kiddush. Kiddush this year is also complicated. You ready? Why? Because on a regular Shabbat, this is exactly the time when you would be making Havdalah.
Yes.
Right? So now we have to do Kiddush and Havdalah all in one. Not just that, but there's another interesting part about it. We skip one element of Havdalah. One element of Havdalah is when we smell the besamim, right? In order to kind of, we always talk about this. We say we have an extra soul that accompanied us on Shabbat. Now that soul is leaving. So in order to, right, because we're going back into the weekday. So therefore, we smell besamim in order to kind of ease the neshama's transition out of our body, because it leaves during Havdalah. However, tonight, that soul is not leaving. It's staying with us, because it's staying from Shabbat into the holiday. So we do a Kiddush and Havdalah combo, minus the besamim. We don't have any sweet-smelling spices. So what we do is as follows. We start off by making a blessing on the wine. You could follow this in your Haggadah. Don't worry, it'll be there. We start off by making a blessing on the wine. We continue by making the Kiddush, which is when we commemorate the holy day that we're going through, etc. We then make a blessing on fire, because Saturday night is still the day when we commemorate the creation of fire that was created for Adam on Saturday night. However, we don't light a candle like we usually do and put our fingers. Instead, you're holding your Kiddush cup. There's only so much you can do. You glance at the candles which were lit for the holiday. But you make the blessing, thanking God for creating fire. We then continue with the Havdalah. Again, it's in there. The one difference in the Havdalah is, remember, Havdalah means separation. Normally, it's a whole blessing about how Hashem separates between holiness and unholiness. Right? Holiness and the mundane, the rest of the week. But now, on Pesach, whatever, this year on Saturday night, we make a special Kiddush. A special Havdalah. And during this Havdalah, we mention Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. Blessed is he who separates between one type of holiness and another type of holiness. Again, this is all in your Haggadah. You'll see this. Your Haggadah may have shaded areas for these things. Now is a good time to be writing down. Don't, note to self. Don't forget, I say a special Kiddush because it's both Saturday night and the night of the Seder, or the Kiddush for Passover. Okay, this Kiddush cup is also cup number 1 of the Seder, of course, right, of our 4 cups of wine. As a result, we are also commemorating freedom with this glass of wine. So as we drink it, we lean towards the left side. Back in the day, only the free, only the wealthy and the luxurious, those are the people who would sit leaning down and enjoying their time as they made Kiddush. Okay. The next step is we wash our hands. The primary reason for washing our hands here, the next step in the Seder, is in order to make the children ask. There is a law it's a very bizarre concept, but there is a law in Shulchan Aruch that says that whenever you eat something dipped into water or liquid or something like that, you're not supposed to touch with your fingers unless your fingers have been washed. I won't get into the whole significance of this law. It's not necessarily common practice that people see this happening. So we do this in order to get the children to ask. And after that, of course, we do karpas. You take your vegetable, whichever one you chose, onion, potato, whatever it is, right? Parsnip. You take it, you celery, whatever, we went through the whole list. You dip it into salt water and you eat it. Larry, what do you think? You think we lean while we eat the karpas?
Do you think I what? We what?
Do you think that we lean to the left while we're eating a vegetable dipped in salt water?
I don't know.
Okay, so let me remind you, the golden rule is as follows. If we are doing something to commemorate freedom, then we lean to the left. If we are doing something to commemorate the slavery, in other words, we're remembering how sad we were, then we don't lean. So karpas, the whole purpose of karpas, we're taking a vegetable, we're dipping it into salt water to remember the bitter tears. The Torah tells us that the Jewish people literally cried tears. That's how hard they worked. Because that's what we're commemorating during this step. That's why we don't lean, because this is the sad part. Remember the low to the high, the drama that we're trying to create here? This is when we want to reenact. This is a good moment to think, to meditate about those parts of the Seder, about those parts of our lives that have us in exile. Just trying to take a look at the time here, see how behind on time I am. I'm always behind on time. The question is just how much. What time is it? How come I don't have the time here?
7:58.
7:58. All right. Laura, go ahead. You have a question. Go ahead.
Sorry to take up more time.
No.
We're already behind, but why is it lean to the left rather than lean to the right or lean to the rear?
Good
or
question.
lean forward?
That's actually a very practical medical reason, because the way that our system over here is set up, we have a breathing pipe and I forget what it's called, a trach, of course, a breathing pipe and a eating pipe. And if you lean to the left, it's there's less likelihood that you'll choke. Isn't that interesting? That's the reason. That's why it's to the left. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be leaning so low down that there's even a chance that you'll choke. You can just lean a little bit. By the way, it's a nice custom to have a pillow with you, to really, embody. If you have like a some sort of, not a sofa, but like a comfy chair that you can bring to the table to sit and be comfortable, while that's very appropriate. And to lean on a pillow as we do so. Okay, so karpas, how do we do it? We take the vegetable in our hand, we dip it into salt water, we make a bracha on it. The bracha that we make is borei peri ha'adama, so it's a vegetable. And then, while we do so, we have in mind that this same bracha, borei peri ha'adama, should go also on the bitter herbs that we're gonna do later, the maror. And then we eat it. Okay. Now, this is another strange phenomenon. And in addition, obviously, to the significance that there is here, the main purpose is to stimulate the children, stimulate the questions. So if you're thinking I'm a bad Jew because I'm sitting here and I'm asking questions the whole Seder, and I'm looking up the questions in my Haggadah and my this, that is the whole purpose of the Haggadah, of the Seder. The purpose of the Seder is we have these weird, significant things. We know they have some sort of significance, and then we do them in order to stimulate ourselves. We're like, why do we do this again? Oh, right, because of the story, because of the story. So when we get to the 4 questions, we'll see that's part of the 4 questions, is why are we dipping so much? Okay. The next thing we do is we relive the Seder. Okay. Before we begin reliving the Seder, we have to say the story over poor man's bread. Poor men, right? Because that's the Jewish people left Egypt famously with lechem oini, with poor man's bread on their back. Poor men never have a full loaf of bread or a full matzah, crack, or whatever it is. So the first thing we do is we split our matzah in half. Without a doubt, your matzah will not be split directly in half. The smaller piece we now put back between the Seder plate, right back where underneath the Seder plate. That matzah is now the poor man's bread. It's a little piece of a deflated piece of bread, etc., right? That we are going to tell the entire story over that matzah, with that matzah in front of us as witness to it, so to speak. I'll tell you an interesting story about that shortly. For those of you that are kind of thinking, when is this? What's our time frame here? I'm going to try to be done by 8:15, if that's okay. What do we do with the larger piece? Now is the time to hide it, take it, put it in a special whatever it is bag. And hide it somewhere where your grandkids, your kids, or even yourself, you won't be able to find it later. No, you yourself should be able to find it. But this is when we hide the afikoman for later. Okay? It's now time to pour our next cup of wine. Okay, because the entire story, we are going to tell the story of Passover over the cup of wine. And now we can get started with telling the story. Telling the story opens up with the 4 questions. The children ask the 4 questions. And the 4 questions, of course, are number 1, why? So generally speaking, why is this night different than all of the nights? Question number 1, on all of the nights, we don't necessarily dip our vegetables at all. Never mind once, twice. And tonight we dip twice. Question number 2, all of the nights we eat leavened bread. Tonight we eat only flat matzah cake. Question number 3, matzah cake is such a misleading word. I don't know why they call it matzah cake, but that's the way they always translate it in all the verses. Matzah is very far from cake. And my birthday is on the first night of Passover, at the Seder night. Yeah. I'm turning 31 this year. And my son keeps hearing that we're going to be eating matzah cake. I hate this disappointment in his face when he sees I'm not getting no cake. Anyways, so that's the second question, why on all the nights we eat bread, but tonight we only eat this matzah. The third question is, on all the nights we eat not lots of vegetables, a nice salad, whatever. Tonight we eat these bitter vegetables, this. And then the fourth question is, on all the nights we eat sitting straight, and tonight we eat or drink or do all these things leaning, what's going on here? And from here, my father would always begin the next part of the Haggadah by starting off. He would say in Yiddish, he would say, because we would all ask the traditional 4 questions in Yiddish. We'd go through each member of the family one at a time. And then he would say, and the answer is, and that's when he would begin to start telling the story, and we would all read it together. Avadim hayinu, right? We were once upon a time slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, etc. That's when we start to go through the entire Haggadah. We're not going to go through the whole Haggadah, but I will share with you one story which you can share at your Seder if you'd like. It's a beautiful, beautiful story, and I love it so much. I share it very often. And then we'll move right on along to the next step, even though really this part takes quite a while because you're reading the whole story. Like we said, you're starting from the beginning, you're going to the end. Dayenu is part of this part, right? When we say all the things we're thankful to God for, if only he had done this part, that would be enough. If only he had done this, it would be enough. Even if he only gave us the 10 plagues, that would be enough. Even if he only, split the sea, that would be enough. Even if he only gave us the Torah, that would be enough. Even if he, right? But he did all of that, and he brought us to Israel, and he gave us the Beit HaMikdash, etc. One more point to think about is that while you're going through the 10 plagues, there's one point when we go through the 10 plagues, it is our custom to take the cup of wine and pour into a broken vessel, if you have one, if not, then into a disposable vessel, 10 drops of wine. In other words, as you're saying each one, dam, blood, tzvardeya, frogs, as you go through each one, I don't know why I stopped going through the slides. Okay, that's what we're holding. Okay, this is the 4 questions. As you go through each one, we pour a little bit into this broken vessel. After that, we pour as little as we can into the vessel. And the reason for this is because after that, the remaining wine inside the vessel, inside the Kiddush cup, is considered very spiritual, very special wine full of blessing. Kos shel bracha, it's called. So you want to pour out as little as possible. And then, of course, we're going to drink the rest of it at the end of this section when we tell the entire story of Passover. But I promised I would tell you a story, so here it goes. I think it was the Berditchever, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, a pretty famous rabbi. They tell the story that at his Seder table, there was there were a lot of Jews, I'd imagine. There was a Jew who didn't really know how to read the Haggadah properly. His Hebrew wasn't that great. And so he's reading through the Haggadah, and he's given the portion to read on behalf of everybody, where it says that the mitzvah of reciting the story of Passover is at the time that the matzah and the maror are lying before you. He's reading, and he misread a little bit. Maybe he was a little dyslexic, or whatever it was. He reads matzah b'shah sheyesh matzah maror mechutanim lefanecha. At the time that the matzah and the maror are in-laws by you. So the people on the table start to laugh. You made a mistake and this and everything. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev got very, or whichever rabbi it was leading the Seder, became very serious. He says, "Let me tell you a story." Here's the story. He says, there was once a wealthy man He was one of these wealthy businessmen who would fly around the world, and he never had time to stop. He never had time to settle down. So he never really married. He never really had any children. This always bothered him. And so one day he finds himself in a hotel, and he's being served by one of the waitstaff from the kitchen. And as the story goes, love at first sight. He falls in love with her. He starts to talk to her. Before he knows it, he proposes right there on the spot. Will you marry me? The girl looks at him. She goes, you serious? You know what it would mean to me to be married? I've never been married. You seem like a fine gentleman. You're going to take care of me. You're also well-to-do, right? She says, yes. So he says, okay, but it's on condition that we get married tonight. This is my breakfast in the morning. She goes, are you kidding me? Tonight? So he says, yeah, tonight. Maybe it was the next night. I don't know. Something practical within a very short amount of time. So she says, all right, let's do it. So the whole hotel goes into a frenzy. Of course, they're having the wedding at the hotel. There's a wealthy man. He says he's gonna pay you top dollar. So they start bringing in all the chefs and everybody starts going crazy and they're baking and this. Fine. Where does the wealthy man go? He goes to his room to start getting ready. He takes a shower, settles down. Today's the day I'm gonna finally get married. She's gonna be my wife. We're gonna move on. 5 hours later, it's a couple hours to the wedding. And he figures, let me go see what my betrothed is up to. So he goes down to the kitchen. What do you think his betrothed is up to? She still has a job. Her boss said, sorry, marriage or no marriage, I need you in the kitchen. So she's busy and she's running back and forth from one thing to another thing. And this thing burnt and this thing, because they're getting ready for the wedding. And she's cooking the food. And this thing burnt. And anyways, and she's wearing like this tattered apron, because she threw something on. So he walks in, he sees all this going on, and as she passes him, at one point, he cuts off a little corner of the tattered apron. Okay? So she sees him do this, and after he leaves the room, she walks over to the oven that has the food that got burnt from all the craziness that was going on. Some of the food had burnt. She takes a little burnt piece of cake, she puts it in a Ziploc bag, and she sticks it in her pocket. A couple hours later, she finally takes a shower, they finally get married, the beautiful ceremony. And the next day, they're out of town. And she's gone with her job and gone with everything. Nope. A couple months later, a couple years later, I don't know how long it took them, right? But like every good couple, things started to get a little rocky. And he's screaming at her, and she's screaming at him. And how come you have no patience for me? How come you have no time for me? And what are you doing? What are you doing? How come you always do this to me? How come you always do that to me? And they're at each other's throats. And finally, things get to such a heated point that he whips out the little piece of cloth that he had torn from her apron. And he says, you lowly kitchen maid, who do you think you are to talk to me the way you're talking to me like this? Do you see what you used to be? You used to be a maid in the kitchen. You used to be a helper in the kitchen. And now everything you have here, you think you're such a princess, a queen, that you're such royalty. I took you from this. And look at what you've become and how you talk to me. She looks at him. He pulls out of her pocket the burnt piece of cake. She says, yes, but who rushed the wedding? On the night of Passover, there are two things in front of us. And the fact of the matter is that we have a very, very, very complicated relationship with God. There are times when our relationship is rosy-dozy. There are times when it's not. And every once in a while, Hashem gets upset at us. And perhaps at the night of the Seder, Hashem takes out the maror, takes out the bitter herbs, and he looks at us and he says, you lowly people, you used to be slaves. And now you're not serving me, and now you're not following the straight and narrow, and you're not doing everything that I want. You're not fully in love with me, etc. Right? Hashem pulls out the maror and says, "Remember the bitter slavery that you had in Egypt, and what I took you out of, and what I made you into." And we pull out the matzah. We look at Hashem and we say, "But who rushed the wedding? You fell in love with us. You chose us as your nation, and you brought us up from Egypt. So quickly did we have to leave Egypt. So quickly did you want to make this whole thing happen that the dough didn't even have time to rise on our backs." And this matzah and this maror signify that relationship that we have with God. So that's one story you can share at your Seder table. And it brings us to the next portion of the Seder, which is, of course, starting to do the mitzvahs, right? So we finish the whole retelling of the story. We drink the second cup of wine, of course, leaning to the left. And now it's time to eat matzah. So, of course, we wash our hands 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left, making a blessing on the tilat yadayim, as we would if we were eating challah on a regular day. And then we eat some matzah. We try to eat from the top 2 matzahs, right? You want to try to eat a significant amount, even if matzah is not your favorite. Personally, it is my favorite. But even if matzah is not your favorite, or it's a little hard on your digestive system, you should try to eat a significant amount of matzah. I don't have the exact amount in front of me, so I cannot announce it here. Hold on. Maybe I do. I don't think so. Oh, here we go. At minimum, about half of an average size shmura matzah. Okay, so if you received a box like this from me, or if you have a box like this at home, these matzahs, about half of one. That's the minimum amount you should be eating for the mitzvah of matzah to do the mitzvah that night. That's a good thing to write down, at least about a half. So you can eat 3/4 of one just in case. All right, but we're eating only from the top two matzahs. Remember, the top full one and the bottom one, the middle one, that's only a little bit. Okay? After we eat the matzah, now it's time to eat the maror, the bitter herbs. We take the romaine lettuce, we put some horseradish inside, we wrap it up together, we dip it inside the charoset, we wipe off the charoset because we don't want it to take away from the taste, and now we eat this. We don't make a blessing, and the reason is because we already made a blessing. Remember, karpas at the beginning of the meal. Larry, do we lean to the left or we don't for the maror, the bitter herbs?
For the maror, yes, to the left.
No, we don't. We don't.
Or to the right.
We don't lean. No, we don't lean. We don't lean.
We don't
Remember,
even lean.
leaning is a sign of freedom. And now we're remembering the slavery. This is the bitterness of the slavery. So we don't lean to the left. Okay. Moving along, we then do a sandwich, a korech sandwich. We take the bottom matzah, which is the one that's left over. We take our maror, we put it in the middle, we put a matzah on top, and now we eat it as a sandwich, and we say, Kain asa Hillel. The reason we're eating this sandwich is because in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, there was a man whose name was Hillel, and he would say that you should eat it all as a sandwich. So his sandwich didn't just have matzah and maror. It also had a good juicy piece of flesh, good juicy piece of meat. Because from the Paschal offering, I always say we lost the best part. Imagine it would literally be like a shawarma. In any event, but so we say this little paragraph. The Kain asa Hillel. This is what Hillel used to do in the times of Beit HaMikdash. He would make this sandwich. Now it's finally time to eat. Somebody texted me after they made the reservation for our community Seder here. If anybody would like to join us, it's still not too late. Please let me know. You can make a reservation, and then you'll have a rabbi guiding you through the whole thing. If you're comfortable coming and joining us here. It's an outdoor Seder. But somebody asked me, he says, I made my reservation. What time is the meal? He goes, I know you guys do the whole thing at the beginning. I said, listen, you're supposed to be there from the beginning. That's the whole significant part. But finally we get to the meal, and we should eat like kings, even if it's very late. We should eat like kings. Okay, beautiful. Once we finish the meal, it's now time for dessert. Dessert is, you guessed it, more matzah. The afikoman. That piece that we hid before, we now eat it. The bigger piece from the middle matzah that we split, beautiful. After we finish the afikoman, right before benching, it's time to do two things. It's time to fill up our third cup of wine. We're going to bench over that cup of wine. In other words, we're going to say the grace after meals over that third cup of wine. We are also going to fill up a separate goblet for Elijah the prophet. Without getting into all the details of why Elijah the prophet visits every Seder, there is a tradition that Elijah visits every single Seder. In fact, the night of Seder, we take some of the candles that we lit for the holiday candles. We go to the door and we open the door and we say the paragraphs that there are in the Haggadah. Say then, in any event, greeting Elijah the prophet. Presumably, if he drinks from your cup of wine, from the cup of wine that you put out for him, you will not see it. So therefore, we pour it back into the bottle of juice or of grape juice or wine or whatever it is that you poured for him afterwards, while singing Eliyahu and Avi, of course. Now it's time to bench. All right, regular grace after meals. We add in Ya'aleh V'Yavo, the special paragraph for Passover, which will be probably not shaded in your Haggadah because the Haggadah is only meant for the night of Passover. And then, of course, right after benching, we make a Hagafen and we drink the third cup of wine. So what's left, right? What's left? What's left is Hallel, singing praise to God. Now that we've gone through the whole process, hopefully you haven't just said the words, you haven't just told the story, but you've actually gone through your own emotional, redemptive process of exile to redemption. Now it's time to sing God's praises, right? It's time to sing God's praises. Thank you, Hashem, for taking us out of Egypt all those years ago. Thank you, Hashem, for all the miracles you've done for us back then and throughout the ages. And thank you, Hashem, for all the miracles that you do in our own lives every single day. For the most part, this is identical to, at least parts of it are identical to Hallel that we say on Rosh Chodesh or on a holiday, etc. But then there are extra paragraphs added in that particularly pertain to the miracles of the exodus from Egypt. This concludes the Seder. After we finish Hallel, we make a bracha borei pri hagafen. We drink the fourth cup of wine, and we say L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. May next year be in Jerusalem. May we celebrate next year in Jerusalem. This, for the most part, concludes the Seder as we know it. It's important. I always feel like I need to remind everybody, because unless you're Israeli or intend to go to Israel for Pesach this year, we will be making two Seders. One is Motzei Shabbos, one is Saturday night, and the second one is on Sunday night. Also, a note about timing. Take a look at your calendar. I know most of you want to start your Seder at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but the Seder should be started after dark. So even if you're going to start something earlier and you're going to get together with family and you guys are going to schmooze and spend time and maybe even eat something, you're welcome to do that. But the actual Seder, the steps, and the drinking the cups of wine and the matzah, etc., should be done after dark, which unfortunately is pretty late this year because we changed the clock already. And Pesach is when it is. So the fact is that it's going to be pretty late. It's going to be more like 8 o'clock. I don't have the exact timing in front of me.